Okay, we are so excited to be able to have this opportunity tonight to hear from Chazan Phil Sherman, who is going to be sharing with us an experience of the music of. Well, we'll hear about the music of the Spanish Portuguese traditions, especially, but we'll hear as far as he's going to reach with us. Phil is perhaps known to many of us in the community as a world-class mohel. Just a wonderful mohel. We've used it in my own family and so many others in the community, and far across the tri-state area have had the benefit of his expertise and his care and his seriousness and weightiness in which he approaches that mitzvah and all mitzvot. And if there's any other area, which I know that Phil takes great care, is not only as he approaches the mitzvah of on the bima with the baby, but on the at the shulchan as the Baal Tefillah. Phil is a trained musician and singer. He received concurrent BA degrees in music and Jewish studies from the Columbia University JTS program, and has had many opportunities to sing and to act and to share his skills in many and a whole slew of contexts. But primarily and beyond the acting for this evening, we're focusing on the roles that he's played over the many years as a chazan and a cantor at a number of prominent Manhattan synagogues, including especially the congregation Sherith Israel, the Spanish and Portuguese synagogue in the city of New York. In addition to that, a Park East synagogue, a Lincoln Square synagogue. Those are the areas where you might have heard him, or even from our own shulchan and our own as well. So we are excited to be able to have the chance as a member of our community for Phil to share with us. I'm going to recommend that all of you, if you reach up to the top corner of your screens, you tap speaker view, so that Phil isn't just a little teeny box on your screen, but is the primary person you see. And we'll enjoy our evening together with you. Phil, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you, Rabbi Martyr, for that very nice introduction. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for this opportunity. I'd like to, if I may, dedicate this session this evening to the memory of my father, whose yortzeit just finished, was today, last night and today, Paul Sherman Pesachayim ben Mordechai. To give you just an outline of what I'm doing, there'll be a presentation about the history of the Spanish and Portuguese synagogue, some of the customs, and some musical examples, and I hope enough time for questions, and I hope I can answer them all. So, the history of Sherith Israel, which was the first Jewish congregation to be established in North America, began in September, just before Rosh Hashanah in the year 1654. The congregation was founded by 23 Jews, mostly of Spanish and Portuguese origin, whose ancestors had fled the Inquisition of 1492. Driven from their native Spain and Portugal, the Jews had made their way to the New World and settled in such communities as Recife, Brazil, which was under the more tolerant rule of the Dutch. When by the mid-17th century the Portuguese defeated the Dutch for control of Recife, the Jews of the area once again fled. Some returned to Europe and settled in Amsterdam. Others migrated to the New World colonies of St. Thomas, Jamaica, Suriname, and Curacao. One tiny community of 23 Jews, a group that included men, women, and children, set sail for freedom in the late summer of 1654. Their ship was overtaken by a band of marauding pirates, which not only drove them off course, but permanently altered their destiny. They were rescued by a passing French frigate and taken to New Amsterdam, which was then under the stern and religiously intolerant governance of Peter Stuyvesant. Stuyvesant complained bitterly to the directors of the Dutch West India Company in Amsterdam, urging them that the Jews should be expelled from the colony. The Dutch elders, hoping the new settlers might contribute to the economic growth of the colony, overruled Stuyvesant's objections and issued a grant of privileges to the Jews, giving them official permission to stay in New Amsterdam, as long as they remained self-sufficient and didn't become a burden to the community. The right to remain in the colony did not automatically grant the Jews complete religious liberty. However, the right to worship in private homes was granted in June of 1656, And towards the end of the 17th century and during the first decades of the 18th, the small Jewish community met in a rented mill loft, which was openly recognized as a synagogue. It was not until 75 years later, however, that an actual synagogue could be built. The synagogue, erected on Mill Street in Lower Manhattan in 1730, was the first to be built in North America, and was the first of 5 synagogues to be built by the congregation. The Touro Synagogue in Newport, Rhode Island, which was built in 1763, and to this day is still under the trusteeship of Congregation Shereth Israel, is famously known as the oldest synagogue building in existence in North America today. The Newport congregation, which retains close ties to Shereth Israel, but functions independently and currently holds services according to the Ashkenazic rather than the original Sephardic tradition. It was established as Congregation Yeshuat Yisrael in 1658. From 1654 until 1825, Shereth Israel remained the only Jewish institution in New York City. During those years, the congregation provided not only for all the religious needs of the Jewish inhabitants of the small but growing city, but was also concerned with many of their material needs. From the beginning, the congregation included both Ashkenazic and Sephardic Jews among its members. After 1825, when Congregation B'nai Jeshurun was established by a new wave of Ashkenazic Jewish immigrants, Shereth Israel continued to provide many essential services for the entire Jewish community. Foremost among the congregation's early concerns was education, with references to the synagogue school being founded in the congregational minutes as early as 1728 and 1731. The synagogue's current religious school, known as the Meir Polonese Talmud Torah School, held its first classes in 1803. Another important function of the synagogue community was the burial of its dead. To supervise Jewish burials, the society, still known today as the Chebra Chasad Va'amet, Kindness and Truth Society, was created in 1802, with the primary purpose of providing proper burial for the dead and care for the mourners. The congregation's first cemetery, however, was established as early as 1656. Also early in its history, the congregation established various social welfare organizations. In 1828, for instance, the congregation created the Society for the Education for Poor Children and Relief of Indigent Persons of the Jewish Persuasion in the city of New York. In 1860, that organization became known simply as the Hebrew Relief Society. From its earliest days, Shereth Israel numbered among its members some of the most influential people in New Amsterdam and later, following the British victory over the Dutch in New York. In 1657, one of the earliest Jewish settlers, Asher Levy, fought for the right of Jews to be treated the same way as other burghers in the Dutch colony. Among the founders of the New York Chamber of Commerce in 1768 were Isaac Moses and Samson Simpson, both of whom also served as presidents of the synagogue. Of the 24 men who organized the New York Stock Exchange in 1792, 3 were members of Congregation Shereth Israel. They were Benjamin Mendes Seixas, Ephraim Hart, and Alexander Zuntz. During the Revolutionary War, Shereth Israel and its members played an important role lending both their support and their finances to the revolutionary cause. Those congregants who fought and died during the revolution are remembered to this day in a special ceremony held by the synagogue each year near Memorial Day. Gershom Mendes Seixas, born in 1745, was the first American-born Jewish minister to serve the congregation. Although known today as the Patriot Rabbi, he was not technically an ordained rabbi, but a chazan and a leader of the Jewish community. An outspoken supporter of the Patriot cause, as the British were approaching New York, Seixas packed up the synagogue's sacred objects and fled first to Connecticut in 1776 and then to Philadelphia in 1780, where he became minister of Congregation Mikveh Israel, another Shereth Israel's sister congregations still in existence today. He returned to New York and Shereth Israel in 1784 and served the congregation until his death in 1816. Seixas is known for having composed a special prayer for George Washington's army, and synagogue lore has it that he attended Washington's presidential inauguration, which was held in New York. He was also an incorporator and a trustee of Columbia College for 30 years, from 1784 to 1814. Another illustrious congregant from the synagogue's early period was Commodore Uriah Phillips Levy, a fifth-generation American who was born in 1792. Both Levy's father and maternal grandfather, Jonas Phillips, had served in the Revolutionary War. The first Jewish flag officer to serve in the United States Navy, Levy fought in the War of 1812. He was court-martialed 6 times for his outspokenness against corporal punishment, but he eventually took his fight to Congress and was successful in abolishing the practice. He's also credited with saving from ruin the beautiful estate of Monticello, which was the beloved home of his hero, the champion of religious freedom, Thomas Jefferson. In 1818, the original Mill Street Synagogue was replaced by a larger building on the same site. And in 1834, the congregation moved to a new location on Crosby Street. As the community continued to move uptown, seeking to escape the growing congestion of lower New York, Shereth Israel built a 4th synagogue building in 1860 on then fashionable West 19th Street near 5th Avenue. Among the synagogue's notable congregants during this period was the American poet Emma Lazarus, whose poem The New Colossus was written, initially under protest by the author, for a fundraising auction to help erect the pedestal building on which the Statue of Liberty now rests. Subsequently forgotten and rediscovered some 20 years later, the poem was inscribed on a plaque that now hangs inside the pedestal building. The poem's celebrated lines, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free," captured and immortalized the immigrant experience and have become among the most recognized and cherished lines of American poetry. For the past 366 years, the congregants of Shereth Israel have been instrumental in founding many of New York's vital institutions, both religious and secular, including Mount Sinai Hospital, Montefiore Hospital, the Lexington School for the Deaf, the Orthodox Union, the Jewish Theological Seminary, and Barnard and Columbia Colleges. Benjamin Nathan Cardozo, who served as the Justice of the United States Supreme Court from 1932 until 1938, was a member of Shereth Israel, as was Edgar J. Nathan Jr., who held office as borough president of Manhattan from 1942 to 1946. The Nathan family is one of America's oldest Jewish families, and its descendants are still active participants and leaders in the congregation. In 1897, the congregation moved to its 5th and current home, located on the corner of 70th Street and Central Park West. Constructed in the neoclassical style by noted 19th century architect Arnold Brunner, the building features, in the lofty grandeur of its main sanctuary, a set of stained glass windows created by the studio of Louis Comfort Tiffany. A smaller chapel, also in use today, stands as a replica of an 18th century colonial synagogue interior, featuring objects and furnishings from the previous 4 synagogue buildings. Among the congregational societies still active today are the Sisterhood, founded in 1896, the previous mentioned Chabra Chassid Va'amet, founded in 1892, and the Shereth Israel League, founded in 1919. Most recently, the synagogue has established 2 new societies. The first is Friends of Shereth Israel, a society of individuals who through donations help support the work of the congregation. At present, the society is comprised of over 700 members in 23 states and 7 foreign countries. The second is the 1654 Society, created in honor of the congregation's 350th anniversary and dedicated to the ongoing restoration and preservation of Shereth Israel's historic synagogue building, cemeteries, and archives. The synagogue also hosted Sanctuary in America, an historic exhibit in which rare objects and documents from the synagogue's archival collections were showcased in honor of the 350th anniversary. For more information, you can visit sherethisrael.org, and there are all sorts of resources on the internet. That basically concludes the brief history which I have prepared for you about the congregation. Now, let me talk about what I'm wearing. These are called canonicals. This is what I would wear every day for daily services. Shabbat, the difference was the robe had velvet panels and closed sleeves. These sleeves are open because on the weekday we have to put on tefillin. So that's why they are. This is called a Geneva bib, hence the lace, or the Geneva cap rather, and the lace is what comprises the outfit that a minister at Shereth Israel wears. There was an interesting story about David de Sola Poole, who was the minister of the congregation and one of the founders of the Orthodox Union. He was the rabbi from 1907 to 1972. And one of the requirements of the congregation was that if you went outside to go grocery shopping as the minister, you had to wear this outfit. Well, Dr. Poole objected and was the first one to go to the grocery store in regular clothes. Now, I have more stories, but for the meantime, let's move on to some of the general concepts and customs of the Spanish and Portuguese synagogue. I will leave time for questions, so make notes and jot them down, and I'll try to answer as many of them as I can. The Jews who are descended from medieval Spanish Jewry are known as Sephardic. After the expulsion from Spain in 1492, these Jews settled in Turkey, North Africa, the Middle East, and Europe. The Jews of Shereth Israel are European Western Sephardim. Generally, the Sephardim tend to follow the rulings of Rabbi Yosef Karo, while Ashkenazim, Eastern European Jews, tend to follow the rulings of the Ramah, Reb Moshe Isserles. Western Sephardim distance themselves from Kabbalistic studies, the Zohar, stressing instead the need for rational philosophy. If you look in the prayer book of Shereth Israel, there are virtually no references, no prayer, nothing from the Kabbalah, all removed, only a few things. Some of the customs of Shereth Israel, the most notable custom, which you'll hear in a few minutes when I sing some of the examples, is the pronunciation. The ayin is pronounced as an NG sound. So it's Shemang Yisrael, or Nam Yisrael, or Ana Hashem Hoshinana. And all vets are bets. So the name Yaakov is Yanakob, as an example. In the congregation, we could always tell who the guests were because every time the ark was opened, they would stand. In Shereth Israel, when the ark is open, we remain seated. That's based on Maimonides, the Rambam, who basically considers the ark a separate room. When the Torah comes out of the ark, of course, then everybody is standing because it meets the requirements of having to stand for the Torah. When it's lower than 10 handbreadths, there's a whole bunch of things about that, technical things, but that's what the custom was. When the father or husband is called to the Torah, the wife and children stand. Pilgrimages are made to the graves of holy rabbis. This is known as Hilula, and people recite prayers, give charity, and share meals. These events celebrate the memory of pious sages. Here's something which comes as a great shock to many Ashkenazic Jews. There's no Yizkor, not on festivals, not on Yom Kippur. A Hashkabah, which is the memorial prayer, is recited on the anniversary of the death, and it's called a Nachalah at Shereth Israel, or Meldado, which can be a reading among the Judeo-Spanish Jews. The custom is, Kaddish is recited 1 week prior to the anniversary, to the Yortzeit, the anniversary of the Hashkabah, or from the Shabbat prior to that following day, whatever it is. Now on Pesach, many Sephardic communities allow the eating of rice, corn, and kitnio, but that's only a few. That's not a universal Sephardic custom. Members of each community will follow the customs of their own family. One of the noteworthy customs, they'll march around the table on Pesach at the Seder, which they call the Haggadah, with a sack reenacting the Exodus from Egypt. On Shabumot, which you call Shavuos, before Mincha, Azharot is read. It is a poetic rendition of the 613 mitzvot, and the book of Ruth is also read. They read the positive commandments and half of the book of Ruth on the first day, the negative commandments, and the second half of the book of Ruth on the second day. I say that right, first day positive and the first half right, good. Slichot, for the Sephardic Jews, it's the entire month of Elul all the way through Yom Kippur. For the Ashkenazim, it's the Slichot are recited for the 10 days from Rosh Hashanah to Kippur. Now the naming custom at a Brit Milah, the Sephardic Jews will name after living grandparents. The first boy after the paternal grandfather, the second boy after the maternal grandfather, the first girl after the paternal grandmother, and the second girl after the maternal grandmother, and so on. So those are some of the customs as they relate to the congregation. How are we doing so far? Thumbs up? Great. Okay, we continue. Let's go to the music. So I'll start in the most obvious place, which is the Torah and the Haftorah. So for any of you, Bernie, I think you're on, Bernie Adler and Lona. By the way, thank you again, Lona, for originating this. I didn't say, and also to Judy Grant, thank you. Occasionally, I will read Torah in the Hashkama Minyan and Haftarah, and people will correct me because they think I'm reading the letters wrong because of the pronunciation, but it's what I've been doing for so long. And also the melody is different. So looking ahead to this week's coming parasha, this is what it sounds like according to the Spanish and Portuguese tradition. Rei Anochi noten lifnechem hayom beracha uklala et haberacha asher tishmenu el mitzvot Adonai Elohechem asher Anochi mitzavetchem hayom ve'hakelala im lo tishmenu el mitzvot Adonai Elohechem v'sartem min haderech asher Anochi mitzavetchem hayom ללכת אחרי אלוהים אחרים אשר לא ידעתם. That's the Torah reading. Now the Haftarah for this coming Shabbat would sound like this. Nani ason ara lo nucha ba, hinei anochi marbit bapucha banaich, visatich basapirim. ושמתי כתקוד שמשותייך, ושנרייך לבני אקדח, וכל גיבולך לבני חפץ, וכל בנייך לימודי אדוני, ורב שלום בנייך. So that's a sample of what the Torah reading and the Haftarah reading sounds like. Let's go to something interesting. All right. So there's a famous story which is told about the melody which is sung at Shereth Israel for Tal and Geshem. If you're familiar with classical music, Smetana in D Moldau has a folk tune which he heard. And if you ever hear this in Smetana's D Moldau, you will recognize this tune. But the story is that Naftali Imber, who is the composer of Hatikva, either attended or heard the prayer for Tal of Shereth Israel. And so I'll give you the lead-in and then actually the melody, which you will recognize. Leshoni bonata Elohai vatibchar בשירים ששמת בפי טוב ממסחר. לך לשלום גשם ובא בשלום טל, כי רב להושיענו מוריד הטל, אשר שירתי ואשים דיברתי, ואגבירה שפתי לצור ישונתי, וביום אמרתי תישם קטל, כי רב להושיענו מוריד הטל. So that's the melody for Tal, and I'm sure you all heard Hatikva. Now, we're going to have a musical quiz. I don't know if you're all muted or unmuted, and I'll let whoever's the host running
Everyone's muted. I will unmute everybody if I could figure out for a second.
I want to say something, and I want to hear, in order, try not to all jump in at once, where you think this particular piece is from. Which holiday, which festival, whatever. Aleichem yeda kedosh al mikem she'elot ma nishtana halayla hazeh mikol haleilot madua belel pesach matzot umrorim nata laila ze sabanu buz umrorim
Hi, Roxanne.
All right, so tell me, where's that from? Anybody care to guess?
No,
I think musically, a lot of us are not too good about that.
no, how you doing?
I think we heard Manish Tana in the middle of that, did we not?
Hear that?
Hey, Jonathan.
Yeah?
Yeah. Judy, I think we can invite people otherwise to respond in the chat. Might be the easiest way to respond.
Oh, okay. So I'm gonna mute everybody, or yeah, I'll mute everybody. And do you know how to? I don't know if you all know how to chat. What you do is press on the participant button on the bottom, and a
Or
white
next to it.
screen should appear on the side that shows a
Where?
listing of everybody's names.
But
You know
next to participant, the whole bottom row, you have a few options. And once there's chat, you can just tap right there.
Oh, right. Or you could press chat. That's perfect.
Oh, sure, okay.
Okay. So let's put us back on mute.
Might be complicated, but we will try.
All
Okay,
right.
let me put
Okay.
you all
So
back
when
on
do we,
mute.
where do
One
we
Now,
take
what do
that?
you do after that?
You know what? I'm
Okay.
just going to mute everybody and raise your hand if you think of something, and we'll call on you. Okay. 1 sec. Let me unmute Cantor Sherman.
Yeah, I think I muted myself. We're good.
Okay.
So, we ready for the answer? We have a guess. I'll sing it once more. Alechem yeda kedosha eshal mikem sheilot manishtana halayla hazeh mikol halelot maduan bilel pesach ochdim matzot umrorim nata halayla hazeh sabanu buz umrorim. Any guess? Huh?
Will
That's the obvious
Pesach.
answer. That's the obvious answer, but you know what it is? It's one of the keynote, one of the dirges from Tisha B'Av on the 9th of Av. So here's the concept. What you're not, the words, of course, are a little difficult. It's comparing what we do on Passover, but on the night of Tisha B'Av, you know, normally on Passover we eat matzah and maror, but tonight we have nothing but horror and bitterness and all of the evil things that befell us on this evening. Now, the idea behind this, many of the melodies on Tisha B'Av are joyous, festival, and what sound like happy melodies. I could sing a whole bunch of them, and you'll think, oh my God, how can that be from Tisha B'Av? So according to a couple of the musical scholars, basically, it's looking towards the future, when Tisha B'Av will be turned into a Yom Tov from a day of National Day of Mourning. So therefore, these melodies are in anticipation of that time. Now, one of the favorite things I like to share with people, at the end of the Grace After Meals, there is a Ladino reduction, if you will, of the Grace After Meals. Ladino, of course, is also known as Judaismo. Ladino is to the Sephardim, as Yiddish is to the Ashkenazi. So, the end of the Grace After Meals, מה שאכלנו יהיה לשובע, ומה ששתינו יהיה לרפואה, ומה שהותרנו יהיה לברכה, כי דכתיב וייתן לפניהם. And it goes on. And then הודו לאדוני כי טוב, כי לעולם חסדו. And then we continue with bendigamos al Altísimo, al Señor que nos crió, démosle agradecimiento por los bienes que nos dio. Alabado sea su santo nombre, porque siempre nos ha apiado. Loada al Señor que es bueno, que para siempre es su merced. Bendigamos al Altísimo por su ley primeramente, que liga nuestra raza con el cielo continuamente. Alabado sea su santo nombre, porque siempre nos ha apiado. Loada al Señor que es bueno, que para siempre es su merced. Bendita sea la casa de fiesta, el hogar de su presencia, donde guardamos su fiesta con alegría y permanencia. Hodula Adonai Kitov, Kilei Olam Chasdo. Hodula Adonai Kitov, Kilei Olam Chasdo. And there you have it. Excuse me. If I may conclude with a story, one of the things which I used to do back in the day at Sherath Israel, there would be tours of the congregation. We would have visitors from all over the United States, all over the world, who had arranged to come to the congregation for a tour. And I wanted to give them a sense of the history of the congregation. So one of my favorite stories was that when President Kennedy was assassinated, the congregation wanted to have an appropriate memorial service for the slain president. But they weren't sure what they should incorporate into that memorial services. So we looked up what we did for Lincoln. Okay, I think we can unmute everybody. I hope you enjoyed that, and I'll take questions as best as I can. How do we do this?
Judy, you're muted.
I unmuted everyone by myself. So I unmuted everyone. But I'm going to ask, if you're not asking a question, maybe mute yourself so we don't hear a lot of background noise, okay? Otherwise, I'm going to have to mute everybody, and I hate to do that.
Wait,
Yes, of course.
I forgot, I left off something, and that was how I actually came to Sherath Israel. So I was at Lincoln Square Synagogue from 1980 to 1985 as the youth director, the director of outreach. I was Cantor Goffin of blessed memory as assistant, and taught in Hebrew, did everything, whatever it was. Rabbi Riskin made Aliyah, established Efrat. And then in about 1985, Rabbi Saul Berman became the rabbi. And it was time for me to move on.
You know what, Cantor Sherman, 1 second. I'm going to mute everyone because it's a little hard to hear. Hold on just 1 second.
Go ahead. Should I start again? Should I start again?
Yes, why don't you?
Okay. So I was at Lincoln Square Synagogue from 1980 to 1985 as the youth director, director of outreach, did a number of other things as well. And in 1985, after 5 years, Rabbi Berman became the rabbi, and it was time for me to move on. And I was approached by two people from the congregation. They invited me to lunch and said, would you be interested in becoming the chazan at the Spanish-Portuguese synagogue? I said, okay. And they handed me a cassette tape. You all know what a cassette tape is, right? Okay. And I went home. And since I have a music degree, I wrote everything out. I can imitate anything. And in 2 weeks, came back and gave them what they'd asked for. And basically got the job. And I was there in some capacity or another for 34 years. It was a little bit more than a year ago that I left the congregation after that time. But it was quite an amazing experience with all sorts of incredible things that, you know, I got to take part in over the years. So, having told that story, you now know how I came to congregation in Sherath Israel, because today when I often go to Ashkenazic synagogues, they think I'm Ashkenazic. If I go to a Sephardic synagogue, they think I'm Sephardic. So I tell everybody I'm a naturalized Sephardi. Okay, good. Very good. We'll open up to questions or whatever else I can answer or whatever, sing or what else.
Phil, could you tell us a little bit of this about how, like, the service feels different, not only because of the music, but so the role of what happens up on the bima with the rabbi and the chazan together, and how the community is led in tefillah. Maybe you can just say a few words about sort of the approach to tefillah speaking that's different.
So one of the most, forgetting the music, learning new words and pronunciation, the choreography was a killer. Having to bow for everything. There's all sorts of things going on simultaneously. I'm calling somebody up and starting to read the Torah. Somebody's going down and shout out greetings to him, and it can be very distracting if you're not prepared for it. The synagogue has a choir. reader in the synagogue antiphonal, as opposed to the Ashkenazic, starts the paragraph, everybody mumbles, then he concludes. In this case, oftentimes many of the prayers are sung together.
Phil, hold on 1 second. Phil, it's very hard to hear, so maybe we can mute everybody and just
I'm
maybe.
gonna say, yeah, I'm gonna mute everybody, I think, yeah. Okay, a second. Okay, yeah, Phil, if you could unmute yourself. Okay, perfect.
So anyway, it's antiphonal. There's a response back and forth. So, for example, on Shabbat morning, the choir sings, and everybody joins in. Nishma kol chai tebarech et shimcha, Amonai Elokeinu, beruach kol basar tefaer utromim, zichrecha malkeinu tamid. And so these sing-songy melodies, which are held in a very narrow vocal range, allow everybody to participate. So that's, and it's often very funny because we have very learned yeshiva people who come to Spanish Portuguese synagogue who are lost. They have no idea what's going on. It's great. They don't know what to stand or sit, what to do. You bow, you don't bow. All sorts of very interesting things that are going on that people might not be aware of when they come to the synagogue for the first time.
You know, Phil, it was a little hard to hear you. Have you changed something with yes, if you can sit closer. Okay.
Just, maybe Phil, just try to mute and unmute yourself once. Maybe that might change the, I don't know.
Testing 1 2, testing 1 2. Any better?
A little underwatery, but we're doing okay.
Yeah, but we can hear you. Wendy, do you have a question? Or Wendy, you're just playing with your computer?
No, I don't have a computer on.
Is that Kay Cohen? Oh, Arnie. Arnie, let me unmute you. Or you have to unmute yourself, Arnie.
You hear me?
Okay, perfect. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Kay and I, many years ago, I recall going to that Spanish Portuguese synagogue for Tisha B'Av services. After Kay and I were married, it was many years ago. And
59 years ago.
how much?
59.
59 years ago. Okay.
60 years ago.
60 years ago. Okay. It was 60 years ago. Anyhow, I remember specifically that the shul was dark, totally black, and flashlights were given to the people who came to daven. It was a very interesting experience, and I wanted to have that experience, and I wanted to share it with Kay at that time.
So the Tisha B'Av service is one of the most popular that people come to. I would readily suggest the Friday night service. A regular Shabbat morning is a much more beautiful service, but everybody comes for Tisha B'Av because, Arnie, if you were there with flashlights, that was not long ago. When I first came to the congregation, we were still using candles, okay? And then the New York Fire Department said you can't do that anymore. That's no flashlight, okay? But they have a huge black cloth which covers the entire room, the entire ark. Everything, the bima, the teba is covered in black. We have gas lamps all around the teba, all around the bima. Those are covered in black. When we take out the Torah, we have black remoting, they're just black felt coverings. So we don't really, not just saying during the day, but at night, everything, it's a very solemn and very unique experience, which most synagogues do not have, which is why back in the old days, we would often have to have people overflow downstairs into the auditorium with a video feed to see what's going on upstairs, because it was just a very special service. But I think people should go other times than Tisha B'Av. By the way, Hakafot on Simchat Torah, marching around the Torah, is not a Sephardic custom at all. It was established actually in 1964 by Chacham Dr. Solomon Gaon, blessed memory, and they instituted 7 Hakafot, and they had 7 songs, and they walked around 7 times and said there's no dancing, there's no nothing. It's very high church, a very formal service. Yeah. So that is also another distinguishing factor of the Spanish and Portuguese tradition. Oh, I gotta tell you guys, on Purim, no groggers, not allowed. No. The only thing you'll hear some people do is maybe stamp their feet on the floor. But groggers, noisemakers are not allowed. So again, a lot of different.
Why are groggers not allowed?
It's just not in keeping with the tradition of the congregation. They don't do it.
Do they have Birchat Kohanim besides on the Shalosh Regalim? Do they do it like other times?
Most Sephardic synagogues have Birkat Kohanim every day. The Eastern Sephardic Jews have it every day at services in the morning and of course on Israel and holidays. Shereth Israel only has it on the festivals.
Okay.
We heard you perfectly for there again. I don't know if you just did.
Something
Perfect.
clicked back in. Okay.
Something clicked back in. Excellent.
Not cutting
Who else has a question? Susan, you just have to unmute yourself. Go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I say this with all due I say this with all due reverence. I'm absolutely intrigued by the hat he's wearing, and I wondered if that is symbolic in any way, the design of it or the construction of it. I've never seen anything like that before.
It comes from actually, these are actually made in Amsterdam. You can't see the inside, but that's, I don't know how close it can get within Billion Focus, but it's actually made in Amsterdam. So, because it's just part of the tradition that came down. It's called the Geneva cap, and I think it was worn in other places as well. I did mention, of course, earlier in the talk, ministers, and this is what ministers wore as officiants of whether it was the church or synagogue or anything else. This is what identified one. And of course, barristers in England, lawyers in England wear this also, but they have a much wider lace than we do. But it's not an uncommon mode of dress.
Thank you.
Sure.
Norma, do you have a question? Go ahead, Norma and Jerry.
Yeah, in Israel, I attended a Sephardic service. When they take the Torah out and they start to read the Torah, they expect each one, at least in that place, they expected each one who was called up for an aliyah to read his portion. They don't have someone else reading for you. In addition to which, when you start to read the Torah, you read one sentence and there is a young child next to the bima interjects with some explanation or some comment on the line you've read. Is that done here also?
No, let me explain. A number of things. Number one, at the Spanish-Portuguese synagogue, the Baal Kriya, the person who reads the Torah, reads for whoever comes up, except if the person is a noteworthy rabbi. Then we offer the pointer to the rabbi, and the rabbi will read his own portion. What you just described harkens all the way back, and Rabbi Marty will back me up on this one, was basically they had a Torah reading, and after each verse, they would have a meturgaman, somebody who would translate the Hebrew into Aramaic or whatever language so people understood what is also what is read. The other thing I should mention is that at the Spanish-Portuguese synagogue, the Torah is raised levantar, not hakba, levantar, before the Sefer Torah is read. But the Spanish and Portuguese Torah is like the Torah in the Ashkenazic synagogue with a cloth mantle. The Eastern Sephardic Jews have the hard case, which sits on the teba, sits on the table, and they read it. They open it up and read it that way. So, excuse me, that's a difference. So the Western Sephardic is somewhere in between the Eastern and the Ashkenazic. There are a lot of customs. Again, the Jews of Spanish and Portuguese, the Western Sephardim, came from Spain, Portugal, England, Yugoslavia, Bulgaria, and those countries. Mainly the Iberian Peninsula.
Another question.
Yes.
How about Ladino? Is that, you know, the Ladino language, which is comparable to Yiddish? Is that
Well,
at all
that's
involved in
that's-
any of the sermons or speeches or any of?
okay. So the Ladino that I sang before, Bendigamos, that's the end of the Grace After Meals. The only other sample we still have left of Ladino is in the Fast Day Prayer Book for the Haftarah on Tisha B'Av, where there's the Hebrew, and then it's followed by a Ladino commentary. Now, when I first came to the congregation, there were many Jews who came from Rhodes, who came from, where else they come from? Come on, I can do this. Give me a second. Anyway, they came from Rhodes. I'm blanking.
You're
You
having a
can-
senior moment like all of us.
No. But anyway, the point is, they all spoke Ladino, okay? That was their Yiddish. That's what they spoke. But they're now that whole generation is gone. Nobody really left speaking it.
Well, one second. Lona had a. Oh, I'm
good,
sorry.
go.
What?
Go ahead.
Lona had a question. But you have to unmute yourself, Lona.
Okay, hi. So I'm wondering, ceremonially, is it different for bar mitzvah and for wedding ceremonies? Are the customs different? Is there a different set of practices for a boy who gets bar mitzvah or even a girl who gets bat mitzvah?
Okay, so the concept of the bar mitzvah, basically when I first came to the congregation, if you were an Israelite, you read the 5th Aliyah and the Haftarah. That was what was assigned. But now later on, when the yeshiva movement we had a lot of kids going to yeshiva, they would eventually read the entire parashah. If there were some kids, they would read the entire Torah portion, as well as the Haftarah.
Okay.
Bat mitzvah, of course, is a relatively recent innovation, and so those are held on. They have certain, for example, they have women's services from time to time. The women have their own Megillah reading, things of that nature.
Mhm.
Weddings are interesting. So the first thing I'll say about weddings is they have not one but two ketubot. Two wedding documents are filled out, identical. The couple takes one and the synagogue keeps one. We have the ketubot, the wedding documents, going back, I would say, to the mid-1700s. Okay, books and books and books, volumes of ketubot. Because if anything ever happened to the original, we had a second original to make sure that if whatever happened, you got to prove you were Jewish or whatever it was, then therefore they would have a ketubah. There is no badekin in the Sephardic wedding. In the Sephardic wedding, the groom doesn't come in to check and see if he's got the right woman. That's not something which is part of the tradition. Those are some of the differences. Yeah. Oh, by the way, I'm sorry. For the bar mitzvah, if the boy is a Kohen or a Levi, instead of reading the 5th Aliyah, he reads the Kohen portion or the Levi portion. Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, interesting. Thank you.
Rabbi, you're next.
Yeah, it's two questions for you, actually, Phil. One is just about the present makeup of the congregation. Would you say the people who can trace their roots back to Spain and Portugal, or more specifically to the Dutch world, is probably relatively minimal at this point, and most folks there are more likely Ashkenazim who have joined. And the second question I have is just about you mentioned the archives. I mean, what kind of undertaking is it to maintain those archives and to indeed share those archives?
Okay. First question first. Let's go to the archives first. Archives is easy because that's in New Jersey someplace. They had an archivist years ago, and they, done as best as they could to preserve it. But I don't know that much is going on right now with the archives. They do have things that they can go pull out and get if they need. I know, for example, they have the synagogue's minutes going all the way back. That's fascinating. As for the people who came, there are a couple of families, the Nathans, the Schulzens, the Politis. There's some families who still, go back, but relatively few. One thing special about the Spanish and Portuguese synagogue all through its history was that whenever a group came from, let's say, when the Iranian Jews, the Persian Jews got chased out of Persia, out of Iran, the first place they came was to share with Israel. We gave them a place to pray, they would stay, and they would eventually move to a community and build their synagogue. Many different groups, whether it was the Egyptians, any group that needed to, the Moroccans, they would all come to share with Israel. That was the original home base. They would come here, their members would come here, and then they would eventually move out and start their own communities and synagogues. So Share with Israel was known for that. So really, again, as I said before, from 1654 until 1825, Spanish-Portuguese synagogue was the only show in town. If you need anything done, that was the only place. Did that answer those questions?
I have actually a question. I find it interesting, like Rabbi Meir Soloveitchik is Ashkenazi. Right?
Oh,
So it's interesting to me that the shul has a Ashkenazi cantor, Ashkenazi rabbi.
Okay, let me, that involves a funny story. Because somebody once came up to me, and I'd been at Share with Israel for a long time, and some new people would come in, and they would come up and go, "Can you believe the rabbi's Ashkenazic?" I go, "No, I can't believe that. How do they hire an Ashkenazi rabbi? It's terrible." Not knowing that they were speaking to me, or going back further. You have to understand, there were many times in Share with Israel's history, there were no Sephardic rabbis available. And so they would call it, look at Rabbi David de Sola Pool. What does Pool stand for? It's Dutch. Paul, he was from Poland. That's what Pool did, de Sola Pool. So he Sephardicized, if you will, his name, right? Rabbi David de Sola Pool. So, and Dr. Gerstein of blessed memory, when I first came down, he was Ashkenazi. And there were many over the years. Many over the years. Actually, I was reminded of another story, if I may. Names. Rabbi Martyr, you'll appreciate this. Names are very important in Judaism. As I said, in the Ashkenazic tradition, they named after those people who passed on, and the Sephardic after the living grandparents. But where do names come from? Whenever I'm describing or discussing with people in the Brit Milah, I always say Hebrew or Jewish name, because it's not always a Hebrew name. It can come from Aramaic, it can come from Greek, it can come from Yiddish, it can come from French. A young lady who I knew, Fortune Mazal Tov, that was her name, okay? The best part is, every Rosh Chodesh and on Yom Kippur, we have a book of Hashkamot. These are, it's a memorial book, perpetual Hashkamot, which people have paid, if you will, an endowment into money, and their names are read before services in the morning on Rosh Chodesh or on Kippur, split up in the morning and the afternoon. These names go all the way back, again, to the early 1700s. Now, what's really funny, when you read some of these names, one of them, which I remember, was Edgar Bar Mortimer, okay? Edgar Bar Mortimer, that's his Jewish name. Or Washington Bar Elmer. These were the names. So sometimes I'll come to a Brit Milah, of course, if I'm dealing with an Ashkenazi person, he hears something like this, very, very confused. What do you mean? That's not a Hebrew. It's fine. It's a Jewish name, if that's what they're doing. We had an individual. This is also something in the naming category. When we call somebody up to the Torah, it's Chaim Bar Yehuda. Bar Mitzvah means son of mitzvah. In the Ashkenazic community, they call up, Chaim ben Yehuda, but we say Chaim Bar Yehuda. There was a gentleman in our synagogue whose name was Ben. His father was also Ben. So he would be Ben Bar Ben. However, Reverend Cardozo, Abraham Lopez Cardozo, blessed memory, the only time he ever used Ben was to call this guy up, because he would say, Ben, 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 Young Amot Hashem Atov, HaGebir, Ben, 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 Lichro, Ba'atorah, Shnerehu Tzuro. Gave him it's a kick. He loved it. Okay, great. So, something about names. Always very interesting.
We're going to end with one more question, John. You know what? We'll do two more questions. John and Juana. Okay, John, you go first. You unmute yourself.
Yeah. I was in Philadelphia in the Sephardic synagogue there for a Shabbos. And they
So
showed
you're there
us
for
a
Shabbat.
museum with a thank you note from Abraham Lincoln for their note of condolence on the death of his son and so forth.
Yes.
Interesting. They said the same thing you said, that almost all the people are now Ashkenazic people, but they still follow the Sephardic rite. For Suda Shlishit, however, all the foods were Sephardic traditional foods, in spite of the fact that all the attendees were Ashkenazim. What kind of a Suda Shlishit food do you have?
What do we have for Suda Shlishit in Spanish Portuguese?
What
Is that
kind
what you're asking, John?
do you have a Sephardic?
Herring or no herring?
Exactly. We want to hear the foods.
Whoa, let's talk about herring. Amsterdam was the herring capital of the world. So herring is inherently Sephardic, not Ashkenazic, Rabbi Martyr.
Oh boy, okay.
John,
You should have asked. You shouldn't have asked.
No, it was tuna fish and egg salad. Actually, when I first came there,
I guess all shuls are the same when it comes to that.
No.
Juana, I'm going to have you ask your question. It's going to be our last question.
Yeah, Rabbi, que Dios lo bendiga. You understand what I said?
Once again?
Que Dios lo bendiga. Que Dios lo bendiga.
So, lo bendiga. So, que Dios, which God?
God bless you.
Oh, she said, how beautiful, Juana. Thank you. See, you're supposed to know Spanish also, Phil, if you work at the Spanish synagogue.
Phil, can I ask you one other question?
Are you familiar with the Argentinian Sephardim? Are you familiar with the Argentinian Sephardim? Argentina has a beautiful, beautiful temple in Buenos Aires, a Sephardic temple. It's really gorgeous.
Do we know where they were from, where they came from?
Morocco and Turkey.
Okay, so yeah, so Turkey, see that's the thing, Turkish Jews could have been Spanish Portuguese, but for the most part, certainly the Moroccans, these are, they are North African Sephardim, like the Iraqis, the music is very different, and the customs are different. That's one of the reasons we could never have a communal Seder, a communal Haggadah. The Sephardic Jews have such dramatically different customs across each ethnic group. It would be impossible to make anybody happy and meet everybody's requirements. Virtually impossible.
So can I ask you one last question about the subway? Did it drive you crazy? Did it bother you every 2.5 minutes when you were leading to Tefillah, and the place would be rumbling from the subway coming by underground there?
No, the worst problem had to do with whether it was July 4th or any other time, New Year's, fireworks. That was a killer. The fireworks were so distracting because you couldn't hear anything. Also, of course, fire engines and everything. So the subway really wasn't too much of a problem, but the fireworks, the marathon. They had fireworks at the marathon also, and the music blaring. Oh my God.
You also had the Macy's Day Parade going by there.
So wait, that I gotta tell you. So that's great. Thanks for reminding me of that. So what happened was, Sheriff Israel's portico, the steps face Central Park West. Now, back in the old days, when I first came to Sheriff Israel, we had a Thanksgiving Day service on Thanksgiving with the choir, a full, with Hallel, the whole 9 yards, everything. That, of course, fell away because people eventually left, weren't around, and of course the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, which became a logistical nightmare. However, they reinstituted having a service on Thanksgiving morning, and they would arrange it so people could get tickets. They would come, we'd have special service, we'd have special refreshments for the kids, hot chocolate, donuts, whatever, and then they go sit out on the front portico. First class, #1 seats for the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade.
I know that's worth a lot of money.
Oh, yeah.
Well, this has been such a fabulous evening, really delightful. It just shows that you have people and members of the shul, we don't even know the things that they're involved in when we see them on Shabbos. And well, now we see we haven't seen anybody on Shabbos for a while. But thank you so much, Cantor Sherman, for being so gracious and agreeing to do this today. We really enjoyed it. I'm gonna unmute everybody so you can hear applause.
I enjoyed it too. I'm from North Carolina. Remember me, Risa Berman.
Wow. Who's in North Carolina? Risa Berman.
Risa
Welcome.
Berman. Risa.
Wow.
Risa's from North Carolina. Remember me?
Sure.
All kavod.
Yeah, Risa.
Oh, Risa.
Yeah, Risa Berman.
Risa, it's Jerry Hurwitz. Hello there.
Yeah, how you doing, Jerry?
Okay.
Carolyn.
Good to see you.
Thank you.
They can see
Welcome.
you
We'll
guys.
get you at other programs also. Risa.
I would love it.
Yay, Lou.
Yay, Louis.
Yay, bravo.
Thank you so much, and it's so wonderful seeing everybody. And we'll see you at the
enjoyed your
next
talk,
program.
Rabbi.
The next rabbi's class. Rabbi, when's your next class? This is a good
Thursday
day to shout out your class.
Over.
Thursday morning.
Okay.
Hi, Marilyn
so,
Ezra.
okay,
How are you
have a good night,
doing?
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good to see you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, good night, everyone. I'm going to end the meeting now, so it's going to close the screen. Good night.
Okay, good night, everybody.
Good
See you
night.
again